Did you enjoy the party?
Sure. The prettiest sight in this fine, pretty world is the privileged class enjoying its privileges.
When I say the word Hollywood, you probably think of these images right here. Iconic scenes from classic movies engraved in pop culture, signifying a point in history in which film ruled over the entertainment industry with an iron fist. The sprawling economy, the glamour of its stars, and the iconic beauty of the films themselves. This is known as the American Golden Age of cinema, or the classic Hollywood era, which spanned from the early 1920s to the end of the 1960s. Films from this era, such as Citizen Kane, Casablanca, The Wizard of Oz, Sunset Boulevard, and many others, are well known to movie lovers and just people in general from across the globe. However, at around the same time, Mexico was experiencing the exact same thing in its own film industry. Although films from this time period have been extremely influential and culturally recognizable in Mexico, the same cannot be said about these audiences in the United States. The Academy Award statue is modeled after one of the most prominent Mexican film directors of that era, but which one did you recognize first? So today, I want to bring attention to this seemingly forgotten or overlooked era in film history. I'm talking about the Mexican Golden Age of cinema. In the early 1920s, the Mexican film industry was off to a rocky start. Although there were some hits, most of the films produced at this time were misses. Keep in mind that film was a brand new piece of technology, and investing in such an expensive industry would be financially unpredictable. Not to mention that Mexico was exhausted politically, socially, and economically from the Mexican Revolution, which saw massive cultural changes only a few years earlier. However, this would change in the late 1930s, which is where our story begins. At around this time, things aren't looking so great for the American film industry, or the entire world for that matter.
On Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
This meant two things. 1. Theaters can't commercially open in Europe due to battles, bombings, and the overall overwhelm of war looming over the entire continent. 2. The United States has to economically support the war effort across the Atlantic, while also shipping the Allies tons of supplies to keep fighting. This meant that making films would be way more difficult than before. Across the world, countries united to support each other to prevent the spread of tyranny and pure evil, and would deprive themselves of resources for this harsh fighting for their lives. Meanwhile, this was great news for Mexico since they decided to stay out of it. Until 1942, when a Mexican tanker was sunk by a German submarine, forcing them to join the war effort.
He accuses the Axis and asks for a declaration of war. With the masses of Mexico behind him, the president calls on Congress, which votes for war over a hectic weekend. And now we have another strong ally.
Regardless, Mexico found itself with an abundance of resources, far more than the United States had at that time, and used it to their advantage to produce more films. Hollywood and other film industries in war-torn countries focused their attention towards producing more war-focused movies to voice their opinions to a relatable audience. Although there were plenty of war films being produced at this time, many of which focused on the Mexican Revolution since it was still a sensitive topic at that time, Mexico decided to focus more on genres such as drama, romance, comedy, and musicals. It was also in 1942 when the Mexican National Bank launched the Bank of Cinema, which was used for funding a variety of films and establishing the film industry in Mexico as a global powerhouse in film production. This prosperous era would continue until after the war ended in 1945. Heartthrobs and pop culture stars began to become household names in Mexico and even in the United States. As the 1940s were coming to an end, it was safe to say that this decade was the greatest for the Mexican film industry, with a wide and diverse catalog of films and genres engraving themselves in the popular culture of Mexico. However, this gilded age would come to an end in the 1950s. With the new invasion of television reaching Mexico, many people stopped going to cinemas. The same issue was going on in the United States, but the reason we still have movie theaters today was that Hollywood was able to adapt. From widescreen and 3D technology to grand and formal screenings of 65mm film epics, Hollywood executives found a way to keep audiences coming back to theaters with breathtakingly modern technology. Since this technology was so expensive and so new, Mexican film executives couldn't find a way to use this technology and profit from it, meaning that the film industry was economically struggling. It was also around this time that films began to become formulaic and generic.
Suélteme.
No tire el zarape.
Although the Mexican golden age of cinema died out nearly 6 decades ago, the mark left by it is still seen to this day. It's such a secluded and interesting part of film and Mexican history that doesn't seem to be as recognizable as the classic Hollywood era of American history. Maybe this is just a personal preference, but I find that a bit frustrating. The beauty, the grace, and the glamour of the prosperous golden age of Mexican cinema is so unique and charming, but no one seems to talk about it. Some of the most popular films of this period don't even break 1,000 ratings on IMDb. It's our job to keep these films alive, the same way that we do with old Hollywood pictures. If we don't, they'll fade away into obscurity, never to be talked about again. An entire generation of art and history will be forgotten. But until that day comes, watching movies from this almost forgotten era is the least, yet somehow the best thing we can do.